Seems fair to me.
Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it. Unacceptable by any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. We have a lot on the platter, so let's meet the panelists and then get into it. Let's say hello to the media veteran herself, Wendy Wiese. From St. Louis Magazine, Sarah Fenske, sitting in for Bill McClellan, who's taken the week off. From the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, we welcome Joe Holleman. And from the St. Louis American, Alvin Reid. And we'd like to say thank you very much to Elizabeth Moreland, the artist who's participating in our rotating art exhibit on the mantle behind me. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for sharing your beautiful artwork. And we encourage everyone to learn more about your oeuvres at bravepainter.com. That's bravepainter.com. Well, Joe, you've been covering, as has Alvin, the decision by some to appoint a new prosecuting attorney for St. Louis County. And it's a novel situation that we have here. I don't think we've seen this before, because the county executive, Sam Page, would like to replace the departing Wesley Bell with Court Van Ostrin, who was an attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office and in private practice. Now, the governor says it's his right to appoint somebody, and he has named Melissa Price Smith, who has been with the prosecuting attorney's office for, since 2008. She's in the sex crimes unit, but according to a press release, has worked in all areas of the prosecuting attorney's office, and she's been described as very aggressive and very smart. Overall, your impressions, what's going to happen?
I wish I could tell you. And the reason being is, it's not to dodge the question, as I've been covering this, talked to this attorney, that attorney, this attorney. And what you have is that great situation where every attorney goes, I could argue both sides. Because you have the state claiming that the Constitution gives them a power. Then you have the county saying that the Constitution of Missouri gives them a power. And so you're going to have to go to a judge to decide this question. So anything that we say, we can have our opinion about who we think is right, but somewhere a judge along the line, and then probably an appeals court judge, and then the Supreme Court eventually is going to have to try to figure this out. So now we're not sure. We have two candidates.
And usually, you're right. I mean, it's a little more cut and dried, but this is, sort of all in the eye of the beholder. And whether the county charter is that statute, I think that's kind of the big question here.
Well, I think overall, Melissa Price Smith is the better candidate, with all due respect to Court Van Ostrin, because she has the credentials and experience, and they're hiring from within. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that Sam Page didn't pick her, because here is somebody who, has paid her dues. She's in the office, and for the sake of team morale, go with someone with the experience.
Yeah, it is interesting that Governor Mike Parson came up with somebody who I think would be very palatable to most of St. Louis County. This is somebody who law enforcement is apparently very much behind. But it almost feels like this political campaign, in that it's like, she would be the first woman to hold this job. Oh, Court Van Ostrin would be the first LGBTQ person to hold this job. And he would be the first millennial to ever get this job, as Jason Rosenbaum was saying last week. It's almost like, shouldn't this, this shouldn't feel like a political campaign, but it kind of does.
Go to the most qualified.
Well, yeah, that should be how it works.
And look, how you feel about it is not the law, but this is the county's decision to make. And, people who are elected to office can choose who they want to be on their cabinet. I'm hearing a lot of that these days. Sam Page is no different. So I just think this process is St. Louis County's process, so I can't argue with who he selected unless they were totally unqualified. So I don't have a problem with who Sam Page picked, and the governor really does not care what goes on in St. Louis or St. Louis County. He's just trying to just
I do think the governor, though, has gotten good marks for the one appointment he did make as a prosecutor with Gabe Gore. that was a gubernatorial
Amen.
appointment.
That is
And I think what he did was he went to a person who was a proven prosecutor with experience. And I think that's what he did with Melissa Smith. I think if there's the more political pick, it's Cord Van Ostren, who most people know probably best of all by running against Ann Wagner as a Democratic candidate. So I think the idea of the police associations and other groups saying this Melissa Smith, no nonsense prosecutor,
And
pick
when-
her. I think the governor gets to sort of basically not rub his nose in, but at least kind of send a signal to Sam Page. You go ahead and play politics. I'll just appoint who I think's the best prosecutor, and I think that's the game between those two.
I
When
don't.
did
I think
Melissa
he can
Smith
care less.
interview for the job? Because
Her name was up for it.
Okay.
I think what's interesting here is that the truly political part of this isn't who each of them picked. It's the fact that Governor Mike Parson did not do this in St. Charles County, where there's a Republican county executive. He
okay.
let him
Ding,
make
ding,
the
ding,
pick.
ding, ding.
I think they were thinking of Sam Page because in the initial press release out of the governor's office, it described Melissa Smith as Melissa Page Smith, not Melissa Price Smith.
Well, that's it.
And then they sent a quick correction. It's something I would have done, you know. So
subliminal-
I'm not saying
subliminal.
Subliminal
Yeah, they
mishap,
were
yeah.
thinking. All right, let's move on, Alvin, to well, it's been 3 years and we. Fine.
You
Okay.
hate to laugh at something like that, but
No, it was 3 years ago, November of 2021, when there was a deal reached with the Rams and the NFL to send a boatload of unprecedented dollars to our region, and the city was getting $260 million, which is now $277 million with interest. And this week, the mayor and the president of the Board of Aldermen announced that they've come up with some ideas for this $277 million, including water mains, post-secondary education, streets, sidewalks, housing. What they didn't say was downtown. And downtown leaders, including Ron Kraszewski of Stiefel, had said, hey, if we don't get money for downtown, I'm going to send future employees from my firm to Dallas. And as we discussed last week, I think downtown leaders had vowed to match $100 million if they got some of that cash. So what do you think overall, and do you think there's a big conflict that's going to happen now between downtown business leaders and the mayor?
well, I think that because the plan, the Transform Act that was announced yesterday, it still has to go through muster at the Board of Aldermen. If you look at what the downtown folk and what some other alder people want, and you look at the other one, it's like the ideas were like kind of hatched in the same laboratory. So I see some morphing of and some back and forth on it. I will say that it was January 1st of 2024 was when I said I was going to be sick of the whole deal. Almost another year has gone by, and here we are. I think this can be worked out. I'm glad that it was finally announced. This is where the money is going. I have no problem with a lot of it going to infrastructure.
But this is still a glacial pace. And this not only now has to work its way through the Board of Aldermen, but then there's the public input. I would just like to see people do the jobs that they were elected to do, pull the trigger, spend the money. It's needed desperately.
You're telling me there's going to be more public input
Yes.
after we've had 2 years of
Yes.
portals? and
According
public
to
input?
all the stories.
But I will say, Wendy's right. There is going to be more public input, and I think with there being two dueling bills now at the Board of Aldermen, people are going to try to leverage the public to get what they need to get other members on their side. It's going to be interesting to see that play out. But I think what's happening here is we've got these two different bills, and you know, it's good. I think you say glacial pace. They had $500 million in ARPA money to spend. I think it makes sense. They finished spending that now. Now we can turn to this. Trying to do that at the same time that we already had so much money flying out the door. To me, the timing actually
Well,
seems
maybe one of the
fine.
reasons they're so slow is they don't have the employees to really enact a lot of this. There's a lot of money to spend, and you know, unless you're the superintendent of schools, you find it difficult to spend that money.
I was just going to say, though, I could spend this money.
Yeah, but what they didn't do, they did the third most popular idea from the public portal was to give the underpaid staffers of St. Louis City a pay raise, and that's not in any of these measures.
I'm going
is
to be
it?
a bit cynical here and say that I think one of the reasons it moved at a glacial pace is that
Elections
if you're,
are coming up.
If you're going to buy
was gonna
votes,
say.
you don't want to buy them 2 years ahead of time. You want to buy it a couple of months before the election. So we're going to wait and time this out. It's sort of like highway improvements.
But
they only happen right before an election.
But
so I think they've moved slowly on purpose. I also think you have the government looking at it that they know how to squander small amounts of money. I think it's one of those where they just got too much, and it was like, I'm going to buy an elephant and 5 cars and a swimming pool. And now there's too much there. And the idea of going back to the public, the Board of Aldermen now is a full-time job. If you don't already know how your constituents want this money spent,
shame on you.
Leave office. And stop with this portal stuff and divvy up the money.
I agree with you. I think what has happened now politically, now you're too close to the primary. And I don't think anything gets done until after the March primary because, quite frankly, you've got 2 people, the mayor and then Kara Spencer, and now where Michael Butler is on this, who knows? Although his office was going to be in charge of some part of this. But I think neither supporter wants to help the other out. So I think this thing plays on into the spring.
And we can have another portal.
And I think if they were purposely trying to slow this down, which I actually don't believe, I think it was a miscalculation because I think right now the voters are kind of in a salty mood. It's like we had this huge pot of money, we had that huge pot of money, and our streets look like this. People are angry about it. And so I don't know. If that was their plan, I don't think it was a good one.
Well, then what you're saying is it's not Machiavellian, it's just incompetence.
Okay.
But I think
go ahead.
Spencer's advantage rather than Mayor Jones.
I think there's an execution gap. They have big ideas, our leaders, but they can't get the job done. And I think the best example is one of our top tourist attractions, Ted Drew's on Chippewa, had 2 fatalities there because the traffic is so fast and they need a crosswalk or a light or something. And it's been 2 years. And I just don't think they have the personnel to get the job done because everyone knows that's important. Everyone knows that it's dangerous. But in the city of St. Louis, they just haven't done it. So that's why I think they may need some pay raises for these employees so they can attract people to work for the city. Don't forget, this past year, they have a $42 million deficit because they don't have enough employees to spend it on. No, budget surplus.
Surplus,
yes. Let me correct myself. It's a budget surplus, $42 million in the city of St. Louis.
And according to one of those stories, there was going to be a small additional wage proposal for city employees, but Mayor Jones refuted that at the press conference.
I just put that stoplight there at Ted Drew's. That's what I don't understand because there is a alderperson that represents that area, and I'm sorry, that's not that difficult to get past.
He's been trying. He has been trying.
I'm just saying that one is, that's a head scratcher.
It is. Well, we have a few head scratchers, including a story that came out of St. Louis Magazine today. It's actually a follow-up to a previous effort. It's a little bit involved, but Sarah Fenske, you took a look at a project on Holleman, where the contractor got ARPA money out of the city's Building and Property Stabilization Fund and charged a lot of money to repair, for example, the dormer as well, the dormer windows as well as the staircase on this property. Turns out the property doesn't have a dormer or a staircase, and you did some digging and found out that the company contracted to do the work. It has listed an address of the ex-wife of a building inspector. And it even gets better than that.
Yeah, so today we published part 2 of this, where we find out that this same building inspector is tied to a different company that's the single biggest recipient of this program that he's supervising. They've gotten $1.3 million from the city in the last year alone. And again, he's supposed to be supervising how this money is spent. And it turns out this woman who public records say is married to him is the sole organizer and manager and owner of this company. It's a really bad look. I will say the city is now taking this very seriously. They have opened an investigation. There was apparently a flurry of commotion in the building department today. I'm glad they're taking it seriously. I wish that there were some more checks and balances earlier in the spending of some of this money. You know, we even wrote about this program back in October when there was some weirdness with the house in Hodiamont and pointed out the dormer and pointed out some of these things. There just wasn't much action. And it seems like unless you have this huge smoking gun, it's hard to get people to pay attention to some of these smaller expenditures. And that, I think, is a problem. The public is beginning to lose faith in some of these things because we don't necessarily believe that there's a watchdog making sure that bad guys aren't taking advantage of good intentions.
Well, the fact that unless there is like that come to moment,
Right.
These things just continue to sort of spiral out of control, and I think that's why everybody's losing faith, because how many of these other smaller fires are raging elsewhere?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
We don't even know.
And I think, I guess I go a little farther. I don't think people are losing faith. People have lost faith.
yeah.
And I think that's why governments tend not to respond, because the public has become so inured to, oh, look, more fraud in government, and it doesn't register anymore when you find out that a place in Maplewood is getting money that was supposed to be for North St. Louis, or that somebody's getting money to fix dormers that don't exist. And after a while, people go, this is what government does all the time, and government knows if they're just quiet and don't do anything, we'll move on.
Should we send the money back to Washington, D.C.?
No.
No, that's crazy.
Charlie,
Why not?
that's
Crazy.
No.
I mean,
If
there's
it's
a
being
lot,
wasted.
There's a lot of good work being done with this money. And I feel like part of our job as journalists is to get to the bottom of things when it doesn't happen. And these are the exceptions. This is not, even in the program that the Post-Dispatch wrote about, that they pointed out some great stuff, that's a pretty small program that they were talking about in terms of the $500 million in ARPA funds.
Well, and you said it's been wasted, but you also just mentioned the increase in the amount with interest. So at least it is growing and compounding.
Yes, after the first year when they realized they hadn't put the principal in an interest-bearing
That's right.
account.
That's right.
They finally, someone came around and put it into an account.
I think that I don't know who this building inspector is, but about every other Law and Order, the building inspector
right.
was up
That's
to
right.
something nefarious.
That's right.
His name is Banjo Popula, correct? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is then also what happens is because people have lost faith, that one of the most meaningless things then is when the government that allowed the problem to happen said, we're going to appoint a committee to look into this abuse. It was like, why didn't you stop it in the first place? So unless some bigger organization is taking a look at you, I don't think anybody's trusting a local government entity, be it the county or the city, to investigate.
Well, that's
itself.
probably why the president-elect is going to have a Department of Government Efficiency. Or something. Yeah, we'll see what happens there.
That's horrifying.
Well,
It's actually
if it
a pretty
cuts out
good
some of these,
idea.
it's a good idea
Now,
if it
how
cuts out
gets
some bad
executed.
programs.
How it gets executed is something. The idea of making government be efficient, I never thought was a bad idea. And shame on anybody who does.
Okay, how it plays out. Maybe
you
that's
go.
what
There you go.
Just as long as it doesn't cut my program, I'm for
Right.
it.
Well,
what do you think? Okay.
My mortgage
Yeah,
deduction is
Right.
off limits. Wendy, Wiese, I want to ask you, today happens to be for Roman Catholics the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and folks at the school that bear that name in Ferguson found out this week that their school is going to be closed. It's not just any ordinary school. About 200 kids there, and about 100 are from Colombia and Spanish-speaking. Kids who basically need a great education, right? Do you think that the Archdiocese should, find the money to keep Our Lady of Guadalupe open?
Maybe that is the reason that it is happening on the feast day. I mean, I understand that the church deals in the real world, and the real world has a great many financial urgencies, and they are maybe waiting for a miracle. But there's a certain level of there's like a tone deafness, I think, that is not deliberate. They're trying to put out fires as many at a time as they possibly can. But on the feast day, in the season, the feast day of the patroness of the Americas, the season that we're awaiting the birth of the Savior, to say, okay, you're done, especially in light of what we did learn about the University City Public Schools and how they are doing well because of the emphasis on Spanish-speaking students.
And we're trying to lure Spanish-speaking workers to our area.
Absolutely. So it's just a sad thing all around.
I mean, Wendy, I get what you're saying, but on the other hand, there's never a good time for this. If they made the decision now, then they can't wait until next week or to be, it's the last week before Christmas, and then it's Christmas, and then it's New Year's, and then, the parents are finding out in January. Why didn't you
Day.
tell
Right,
us?
right, right.
We need to make plans for next year. The Catholic Church has the same problem that St. Louis Public Schools has, and that's that it needs to be right-sized. There are so many fewer people taking advantage of these services than there were back in the day, and it breaks my heart. But the only way it's going to pencil out is if we can close down some buildings, do some consolidation, and it's heartbreaking for the people who are caught up in that. But I don't know that
I'll
there's
tell you
ever
what,
a good
the
day.
Catholics should ask their Jesuit brothers, how do you raise money? Because I went to a Jesuit high school and a Jesuit college, and every 5 minutes I'm getting a call or a letter in the mail asking for money, and they're raising a lot of money. And it can be done if you want to do it.
Well,
these are the
but
kids
now-
who need it.
I realize that, but they were raising money for your school, okay?
Correct.
And that the people at this school had money. Now, at this church, these people probably don't have a lot of money, so now the ask is, we want you to support this other school.
And we will do it. I guarantee you, Roman Catholics can do it.
And that
Wendy,
is maybe.
And I could see the Board of Trustees at a missionary Baptist church saying, like, you know what? We just don't have enough people, and we're going to have to, close our church and merge with someone else. It's like they asked, well, Pastor, when are you going to tell the congregation? On Martin Luther King Day? I mean, that's the kind of thinking that.
Yeah.
Right,
Well, but let me say something. What's the name of the Spanish-speaking parish in South St. Louis that has the fish fry?
Cecilia.
And the
Saint
line is
Cecilia.
out the door.
Oh, it's down the block.
St. Raymond's has that Wednesday lunch because they had financial difficulties. Brian Wabi told me this 2 weeks ago. And so they started this lunch Wednesday, St. Raymond's, to raise money for the parish.
But we
it
don't-
can be done.
and
How
we
many
don't-
lunches are you going to have? Is everybody going? I mean, what are we all going to make? You take Mexican food. You take Indian food. I mean,
parishioners
there's only
themselves will
there's
make
only a couple of specialty places you can do.
But wouldn't it be interesting, though, if, because of the timing, that they are alerting the people in St. Louis of the Archdiocese and outside of the Archdiocese to the need, and maybe that will make a difference.
That's true, and it is Christmas.
You just
It is
don't know.
Christmas.
That's right.
And in the Christmas tradition of blaming the victim, I'll do that.
Oh my God.
Sarah, there's a story that there have been a lot of car thefts in downtown St. Louis, even affecting some members of the media. Brett Mega is a host on Y98. His car was broken into this week. Recently, it was at Channel 5. So, the police, Mitch McCoy, police spokesperson, says that of the car thefts or break-ins, 9% of the cars were left running and 39% had the key or the key fob still in the car. Now, you know me. I don't think those cars should be stolen and the perpetrator should be jailed, but don't you think the car owners who leave the keys inside the car are partially responsible?
I just don't think we should talk about the drivers when we have car thieves out there blatantly stealing our cars. Like, let's stay focused on the problem, and that's the crooks.
But don't make it easier, right? Don't make it easier. And I am a living example of the I'm only human, the insurance commercial, because I was in such a hurry to get out of town one time that I left the hatch on the minivan up and drove out of the garage, and the sound was horrific with that window shattering. So we're humans, we make mistakes, but I do think that there is some culpability. We've got to look in the mirror and say, okay, breathe. I'm not going to leave my keys in the car running.
There's when you have a person who leaves their fob in the car, or they leave their car running to run in and grab a soda at a place, and that car gets stolen. There's only one criminal there, Charlie, and it's not the person who was abiding the law and went into the store. It's the car thief. That's it, period. You're not supposed to steal a car. Because then what you're saying is that somehow these 9% were innocent people who were walking by and went, say this person's asking to have their car stolen. No, there's crooks and there's non-crooks, and the crooks steal the cars, period.
Well, I'm not Mr. Insurance Man, but I'm sure people concoct some kind of story when their car gets stolen. They left it running. I don't think they said, like, you know what?
God.
I left my fob in the car. I left my car running and it got stolen. Because they know that impacts the judgment on them. So thus, yes, you have to be responsible if you leave your car running.
Or if you, for example, leave your gun in your car.
Yes, exactly.
No one should steal it, Joe.
Right.
But if you leave a gun in the car and it gets stolen, I think you're a bad guy.
Well, and that's fine, but what you're asking is
bad
like,
guy,
can
just
you
a
blame it
short-sighted
on them?
guy.
No, you're assigning a blame to someone who behaved legally. And I'm not willing to go there.
No,
I'm
it's
not
your
willing
fault
to go
that
there.
your gun got stolen out of your car. That is your fault because you had the
So
gun
if
in
you
the car.
forget to lock the front door to your house and someone walks in and steals all your stuff, that's your fault? No, of course
No, I'm talking
it's
about
not.
a gun.
I mean,
this
with-
whole carrying a
Oh,
gun.
now we're going to put the
With
gun
the
in there.
guns, the ordinance says you have to have it locked in a box. So in
that's-
that case, it's different, but it
Right.
never says you can't leave your car
Unless
running.
that
or
legal
does it?
challenge is successful.
Well, I don't know, but we've been going over this for the 35, 36 years I've been in this city, where people sometimes tragically, like they leave a baby in the back
baby
seat,
in the
then
back
they go
seat.
into 7-Eleven for a coffee, then they come out. I mean, I think, Joe, that car owner is really negligent.
Now we're adding babies and guns. Let's throw in a dying
Nuclear-
patient. Let's just
nuclear
keep
waste.
throwing stuff till you can make
Let
your
me ask
case.
you this: if you have nuclear waste and there's not a
Right,
fence
right.
surrounding it,
Or a nuclear bomb. Let's say I have a nuclear bomb. Yeah.
Oh, if I steal an ambulance and has somebody's heart in it for a transplant?
okay,
God, you
let's go to the old mailbag and see what people had to say about last week's program, shall we? Bi-State is not considered bus rapid transit for a north-south route. BRT is considerably cheaper, cleaner, less disruptive, and more flexible. That from Barbara Finch of Clayton, and we thank her. So I see you're adding a chair for Donnie Bash. Well done. That from Eric McDougall of Wildwood, Missouri. Priscilla Welter of Webster Groves wrote, I had an appointment at Barnes where I was told that they had been trying to hire a few neurologists who came to town because they know how good Barnes was, but they didn't take the positions because of crime in the city. I don't know what the future of our city will be if we lose first-rate doctors. Thank you, Ms. Welter. And finally, Susan Bricky of Pasadena Park wrote, why do you have a streaming show on YouTube instead of an hour of Donnybrook on Channel 9? We avidly watched your turn and the half-hour show with fascinating interviews. You can write us care of 9PBS, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. We love those emails, Donnybrook at 9pbs.org, as they say in America. And on social media, use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. Don't forget to call the 9 line at 314-512-9094. And wherever you are, listen to us on your favorite podcast source and tune in to the 9PBS channel on YouTube for Last Call, where we'll talk about the somewhat extravagant spending of the former St. Louis Public Schools superintendent. What should be done? That's on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week at this time.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.